This is the strategy inside everything. I'm Adam Pierno. All right, welcome back to a very special episode of the strategy inside everything. I don't know how special it is, Mark. How special is it? You feel special this morning?
I like the word very. Very special is good. It's enough.
It's special. Additive. It's additive, yeah. Today's guest this is your second time on this show. I've also appeared on your show on the Sweathead podcast. This is Mark Pollard. Mark, how are you today?
I'm well, Adam. I am 2 days into having officially published my very first book in America as an Australian in New York. It's been busy and it's been hectic and very fulfilling. And all the emotions tend to happen, as you know, when you publish a thing to the public. Everybody that's listening does not know that. I've published a couple, and you've published Strategy is Your Words. It is a tome. I mean, the work that went into your book, we're going to talk about writing in general, but it was a true labor of love. I mean, you drew every page, you created the art for every single page. So it's more, I think, than writing. Yeah, it's more than writing. It's definitely more than writing. There are drawings in there, not every page. There's maybe 15 to 20. I should count them, but about 15 to 20 drawings, I would say. Drawings might be a generous word. There are several occasions where I've used a pen to get my thoughts down. Drawings sometimes does feel too generous, but yeah, it is a tome. It's nearly 400 pages. It's been 2 years in the active making, from a couple of sprints. Sprints is the wrong word, but a couple of really focused phases of writing. And then there was the procrastination and the anxiety, then editing, and then more procrastination and anxiety, design, launched a Kickstarter, and now almost 2 years to the month from when I first started it. I think I sat down to write it it's probably September 2018. It's arrived in America, and now it's started to ship. So it's
amazing. It's an amazing achievement to get that done. Before I ask you, I have so many questions for you. Before I do that, there are probably a handful of people listening who are not familiar with you. Would you just give them a little rundown of who you are and what you've done?
Sure. Yeah. So Mark Pollard, live in New York, obviously from Australia, not England. Grew up in Sydney, have been around the agency world since I was about 19. And for the first decade or so, I was largely working in digital agencies or digital departments doing user experience. We didn't have strategists. We didn't have anyone with many specialized roles. I mean, UX was a specialized role. It didn't exist much. So I was a producer for about a decade doing user experience, information architecture, trying to understand search and all that sort of stuff. And after that, late 20s, became an account planner at Leo Burnett in Sydney, which is it's a really good, prolific, ambitious, creative agency. That agency has won a ton of awards, very competitive, and worked at McCann, big spaceship in New York, moved over here 9 years ago as of May, and now do a podcast, run this community called Sweathead, and want to publish, and I'm sort of shifting my sense of self and how I exist in the world as I move through my 40s.
Same. Yeah. You and I are parallel in a lot of those descriptions of where you are. Mm-hmm. I want to talk about writing the book, 2 years, the process. Mm-hmm. You and I did some things together, I guess about 3 years ago. And I assume some of the drawings that you used in those sessions that we did together are part of this. Because I remember, and please, I want you to describe not your writing process, because I don't know that there is one, but your process for teaching, creating the materials for teaching, getting feedback, and then using those things to feed your writing or your output, and then how the cycle works.
Yeah, totally. It's something I've been very deliberate with in many ways. I mean, I operate pretty spontaneously. So I'm a spontaneous introvert who has social needs. It's quite a strange brain to be in, I'll tell you that much. But yeah, I'd say for the past 12 years, I've written about doing strategy. And the triggering moment was the 2008-2009 global financial crisis, the GFC as we call it in Australia. America does not call it that.
That's a much cooler
Australia
way to
is global. GFC. Yeah. And I just remember
a few conferences happened while agencies that I knew and clients that I knew, their offices were emptying out because big crisis, right? GFC. And so I had a few moments. One was like, I didn't want to be that guy writing about advertising. Like that's, like I don't want to be that guy. I was publishing, by the way, a hip hop magazine, and I'd done that for 10 years and written for tens of music magazines and radio. And that was real. That was my reality. And advertising was something that I sort of fell into and was fortunate enough to be in, but I used most of that money to pay to subsidize essentially my hip hop lifestyle, which was a publishing lifestyle. There's nothing flamboyant going on because I didn't really have money. And so, yeah, the inciting incident was really crisis. At the same time, I would see people turn up at conferences being social media gurus. And I'm like, I've managed online communities for 10 years. I don't call myself a guru or a ninja or whatever, but like, why are these people talking about things that they've read someone else write about in America, in Australia? What? So I started to write about it. And the first post I put up was actually on a guy called Julian Cole's blog. And it was about hip hop and online communities and what you can learn about, managing an online community and social media through hip hop. And so I've always tried to bring the things that are in my life together in unexpected ways through my writing. Is that part of your drive to connect your personal life and the professional community that you are part of? It is consciously part of my drive, and it's a deeper part of my drive now than when I was doing it before. I mean, most people who write, you're trying to write something that's true to you, something that you could stand in front of people and say, I had these experiences and it led me to this thinking, and that connects to your experience here or to this other topic that we didn't even connect to it. That's just the process of lateral thinking or having an idea. That's creativity. So that's what most writers do, and that was natural to me. And I think one of the things that I brought with a few other people at the time, because often we come up with these little gangs, people blogging similar times, and maybe you do some stuff together. But I have a very emotionally oriented and traumatized. I have emotionally oriented and traumatized parts of my family that are very good at oversharing. And I grew up with that as the quiet one, who apparently my therapist was like, when I did some therapy, she said something like, it sounds like you weren't allowed to have many emotions. And it's true. So I would my household was based on one person's emotions, and I would withdraw into writing poetry and into sad music. I grew up with a single mom and a younger sister. And I guess that's like that, and rap is in me now. And over the years, it's increasingly become about philosophy and psychology, and then understanding things such as individuation through someone like Carl Jung. I'm not an academic, but trying to understand these concepts, then what you're talking about becomes the drive. It becomes that thing, that energy that you want to serve, because your 20s and 30s are often very distracted by career materialism and this sense of progress. And I got through high school. If I went to college or university, I was lucky to do that, but I got through that, and then I've got to get the job, and then I've got to get a better job, and then I've got to get a better, a promotion. The endless drive. Yeah. And then you're like, oh my God, even the psychologists and philosophers that we looked up to, so many of them, from what I understand, went through weird phases in their mid 30s to mid 40s, especially. And it's not always about biological age, but there's often a shift. And the shift is that they connect to their own artistry. If you're wired for that, they connect to what is difficult, like the shadow side, right? What's difficult in them. And they work out, or they try to work out, how to assemble a story that might or might not be true, and then live that story. So that's what I've been doing. And I think that's what you've been trying to do as well. Trying. Trying is the key word. It's a weird thing when you are writing about a topic that is about how to express. Our job is about how to express the qualities, the pillars, whatever word your agency or the mechanisms you use, express those things about a brand. And what art is the best expression of the artist put into a way that's accessible for the viewer. But what commercial advertising and the strategy that we inform through that brand strategy is about, it shouldn't, if I show up in it, that's a problem in a lot of ways. If I have to be expressing on behalf of the brand that I'm serving. And so that can be what I learned after 20 years was, I'm stifling myself deliberately I'm clogging that part and keeping that part almost, it's now that we're talking through it, almost the way you're
you described you weren't allowed to have many emotions. I think that can be part of why creative people.
My therapist said that, not me.
Yeah. It was fair enough.
Because I feel myself as emotional, but I love where this is going because I agree. Keep going.
Yeah, I do too. And I think a lot of people would describe me as not emotional. But I feel like my emotions are always on the surface, you know, and I'm working super hard to not tear up or something like that. And I'm just like, I'm just going to be very rigid here and stoic. But by withholding that part of yourself to serve the project, which is your job, that's what a professional does, over time, if you don't have another outlet that could catch up with you and create some kind of problem or just make you feel shitty.
There are so many themes that I want to get into with what you just said. I think just understanding the idea of emotion is important because there are people who are generally speaking empaths. And I know empath has been used to replace the word psychic for some reason recently. That's not what I'm talking about. It's people who think or who think about how other people feel. You can put yourself in their shoes, but really you can't. So it's quite an arrogant thought to think of yourself as being an empath, that you can feel what other people feel. But I think the tendency, again, my therapist pointed this out to me last year. She was talking to me about all this stuff because I just lay down all the weird stuff I've gone through. And she's like, anytime I ask you about your feelings, you tell me about other people's feelings. And for me, that's a sentence she would probably say to anyone that she would identify as possibly being an empath. Because you're constantly not thinking about how you feel. It's like, how does that person feel? Or I will, like you probably, just disappear into, I read this in research, or, well, this is what's going on in culture, as opposed to, you know what, I'm angry and I'm disappointed that these things happened and I feel I was abandoned and whatever stories come out.
Right.
Well, we're like, well, how am I supposed to feel? Here's a framework for it. And so I think
here's a 2x2.
Yeah. There's like the empathy thing. And then within emotions, there are people who, there's the concept of neuroticism and also like negative emotionality and sensitivity. And these things are real. And so you could be an empath and maybe not feel a lot of negative emotions, but maybe you could also feel a lot of negative emotions. Some of that's innate. Some of it's how you grew up. Some of it's just not having coping mechanisms or having good self-talk. Some of it's your hormones. So there's, I've personally found it useful to find better words for these things because it helps me understand myself. And that's in a culture where, I've dealt with a lot of depression and we've talked about it over the years in public and in private. But I remember when I first started to be public about being depressed in my 20s, people around me were like, I've never felt that way. It's like, what's that got to do with anything? Or if they found me Googling it, they're like, why do you have to prove that you've got depression? What's wrong with you? And I'm like, I'm trying to understand it because it's crazy in here.
Yeah.
And so
that attitude, thankfully that door is opening a little bit. I mean, it's a different environment. At least there's some receptivity to it. It's still not comfortable, but that is, I've noticed a shift there.
Yeah. But the language around these things is really useful. So just wanted to point that out.
Well, also I know that in your, some of the training you do and in the Sweathead workshops that you conduct, you have gotten feedback from people that was like, I thought I was coming to learn strategy. Why are you talking about emotion so much? And so you're like, well, you're the fulcrum that connects those two pieces. So if you don't understand that, it's going to be really hard for you to survive this job for 3 years.
I agree. But I'll also say that maybe you don't have to be an empath to be a strategist or an account planner. It's just that's my genre of it. And I think you need to be, but I get small pieces of feedback either in the room when I'm training or through the online course where, like in the online course, I've got this thing because I just did this 100-day course where I was launching a class every single day. And early on, it was just up to lockdown, it was in May and people were exhausted and upset. And so one of the exercises I've got, because one of my tricks as in, it's not a shortcut to anything. It's just, I bait and switch people into thinking they're learning about strategy and then I push them into themselves. A lot of people resist it and they're like, why are you getting me to write about my ugly cry? It was one of my exercises. I wanted people to do it because if you can't admit that you've ever been sad, if you don't have any ability to be introspective, if you don't have empathy, if you don't have intuition, I'm being extreme because people have it. It's just on a spectrum. Like, I just don't think you're going to be a very interesting, compelling, or maybe successful strategist, even though a lot of sociopaths are pretty good at strategy. So yeah, there's a little bit of that feedback, but increasingly I'm like, you know what? I don't want to have to defend what I do. I've been doing this stuff for ages and I've done it okay. I don't want to have to defend myself to people who are not able to get what's going on. Like I want people to be confused by it and come along. But if they're just like, I need 3 frameworks, that's all I want. I'm like, go get a framework. It's not going to help you do any better thinking.
Yeah, Google can get you there. I mean, even Underthink It, in which I posit a bunch of frameworks and a map for how to start learning strategy, there's no mention of emotion. I could go search it. I'm sure the word doesn't show up in there. It is. You
repressed yourself in your own book.
I think so. I mean, I think what I was trying to deliver was to that audience that was, how do I do this? Give me the play-by-play on, I need A to B to C to produce a strategy. And that's what that was intended to be. So it's
totally cool. That would be a more normal way to deal with this topic. Right?
Yeah, but they're coming to people. You don't hire the subject, you hire the teacher. And so the teacher is you, and here's the experience you've had and what works for you and what you feel unlocked strategy and made you successful at what you do. I also think you can take a class, take a course, and discard the parts that don't work for you without complaining. You can say, oh, this thing about ugly cry.
Oh my gosh.
Pass,
yes.
Or I'll try it, but I'm not going to let myself really get too invested in it, but I'll be back for the frameworks that are coming in phase 3.
Yeah. You're an independent thinker. Take what works. That's the point. And it's like, it's a bit zen. A lot of very well-known martial arts teachers, for example, or spiritual teachers, they're like, just take what works. Like, I don't need to convince you of anything. I'm just here. You can react to it. You can throw it away. But to get caught up in hating it, which is not what I get a lot of, or like that, to really want to tear it down, that tells the world more about you than it does about the person teaching you or writing for you.
I don't have a lot of regrets that I verbalize, but one of the regrets I have over the last 4 or 5 years was I was invited to help with a training. I don't know how to even describe this, but it was like the vision for it would be a retreat, and we would do trainings in the late afternoon, but in the morning it would be like yoga and meditation, shared meditation and quiet walks. And it'd be like a real spiritual side and then work side. Mm-hmm. So yin and yang. And as I was reading it, I'm like, I don't meditate. I don't, yoga is something I'm like just exploring and trying to figure out what makes sense. I don't consider myself really spiritual in a way that I can just talk about. I'm not able to be publicly spiritual. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I don't know. Thank you so much, but this is not I don't think this is who I am. Like, I think I would be waiting in the classroom for everyone to come in and disconnected from their experience. I don't think I'd be the right person to do this. And now, 4 years later, I'm like, shit, I should have done that. That would have probably been awesome.
That's just getting older, right? But again, the language, spirituality, and for me, I connect it to the word love. And that came from research, reading into the way that academics measure the reaction to psychedelic experiences. And they use the word religiosity. Did they have a religious experience or something that was something that connected them to the world and gave them a sense that we're all connected and it's bigger than them? That's how they were defining that word. Spirituals within that. And so, for all my inability to actually connect with my own emotion, apparently, although I feel it all the time, or to label it or to deflect from it, while always experiencing myself as emotional, the research stuff helps me understand things. Part of it, I think, is if you grow up with a really stable family, maybe a conservative family with a strong religious structure, you don't have to work anything out. That's one of the benefits of that. That's not how most people are growing up right now, at least in America.
Yeah, the scaffolding is built for you as you're growing up, so you can connect yourself to how spirituality is part of your life.
Yeah, this is how I behave. That's how that person behaves in that role. This is what happens after I die. I don't have to think about any of this. So for the rest of us who grew up in broken families, not to be dramatic right now, but like broken families, and we're constantly having to work out how to fit in, who never felt much stability, it's embedded in you. And that comes through the big 5 personality traits in the N of ocean, and it's neuroticism, being a bit unstable. And it's not about being neurotic. It's about not really being super balanced and which is really common with creative minds.
I think so. Yeah. You're trying to, especially commercial creatives, where you're trying to balance the art and the commerce.
Yes. Oh, on that, you mentioned a point that I wanted to get into. What's your thought on the feedback or this idea that you're not supposed to put yourself into your work, or it's just about the brand, it's not about you, which was a thing you were talking about earlier. Like, talk to me a bit about that, because I've got a relatively strong point of view that's newish on that.
Well, the brand is paying for you to figure out how to connect the brand to the best prospect for the business. And not that you're not supposed to be invested in it or put yourself in it, but if your brief for, let's say, something that is unlike me, let's say my brief for something like BMW was about all the things that I find challenging about BMW, or like I am obsessed with rims.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not really serving that client if I try to get them to invest $750,000 in a TV spot about rims when what they're saying is their engineering is superior to their peers in this space. It shouldn't be about me, and it shouldn't be about my individual feelings about it. Now, I always start from a place of this is how I think about it, and then I ping off of what I know about the customer or the prospect, and then try to figure out, oh, okay, this is how they see it differently than me. Let me go research and understand how that shapes their perspective, and then what is the message I need to create to connect to that person, because I'm not creating an ad for myself. I'm not creating a brand for myself. Almost, I wish we got to do that. You got to do it with your hip hop magazine that was owned, published, produced, and written by you. You get to do it for Mighty Jungle, but you do not get to do it for the clients you serve. In most cases, the audience is not you directly.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think one thing that I really took out of the writing process for the long form, for the book, is seeing a lot of these sentences as mini algorithms or mini operating systems, right? So what you said, I would add a few things to it, which is the starting point is that if you're coming up with ideas, strategy, whatever it is, you serve the best interests of the client, and you serve the research, and you serve the idea, and it's not about you, but put yourself into it. You know, I often, if I'm working with someone and I know that they've got a lot of energy and maybe they're into really interesting things and they do actually know the brand, those other rules are still at play. Like, it's not about you. You've got to do what's right for the research and the brief, etc. But where are you in this? Like, I want to feel someone in it. And so for me, there are 4 or 5 sentences that hang together, and sitting there typing out, almost 80,000 words, I think, really helped me be like, oh, then this, then this, and this, and this, and this. And it sort of reprogrammed my brain to understand language a little bit differently. Did you find that through your writing process?
Yes. And so just to quickly address what you said, I think where the strategist ends up in it is in the satisfaction of the cohesion, that where they're in it is the synthesis of all those pieces they put together, and they're the prism that is projecting it back out into whatever form, whatever the artifact of the strategy is. So if you're not satisfied at that point, that I think is your last chance to be invested in it and to feel ownership or authorship, I guess is a better word. And yes, when I think about not so much Underthink It, which was really like I said, a handbook, but with specific, I can scan that book and think of 5 sentences that are seemingly disconnected that could summarize the entire book. And I bet you can do the same thing with strategy as your words.
Potentially.
Something at the beginning, then a sentence 3 chapters later.
And it's funny because I'm watching you, and the way your eyes moved and your hands moved is exactly how I feel when I'm sort of scanning through things I've written. Your eyes are darting, and it's like that paragraph to that paragraph to that paragraph, because you can often remember writing the first sentence that led you to the paragraph, knowing that paragraph is sort of filling out that first sentence. And then you're like, okay, then I need a strong-ish closing sentence on that same paragraph, but that's going to connect to the following paragraph. Then I'm going to take him on a journey somewhere, then come back. And so it's through that long, I've written a ton of stuff. I mean, I used to publish a magazine. I had more question and answer interviews in that.
Prolific in writing and creating. It's amazing.
I don't know if that's a compliment, but I need to put my brain somewhere. But the thing is, sitting down and writing a book really helped me fall back in love with writing. And I feel a certain joy and energy for it. And I want to write another thing. Like, I want to do my next thing. I just needed to get to this point first. A lot of other people are like, one was enough. and I'm like, no, I'm excited because my brain, I know where I can put my brain every day,
Yeah, the writing stimulates more writing in a weird way.
Yes.
But you know, when you were doing your setup here, when you were introducing yourself, you said something that I made a note of. You said that you wrote it, the process took 2 years, but there was a period in there of anxiety and stalling, I think is the word you used. And I experienced this too, where I think the book was done. It was sitting there. I knew what the next steps I wanted to do with it were, but there was something in me that was like, I don't know, you're going to put this out in the world and people are going to tell you what they think of it. That's honestly what I was like, do I really want feedback on this? You know, is that really what I need right now? Is that going to make me feel great about this, 200 pages that I've just assembled?
Well, I would say I had a few things going on, and not to go back too much into history, but the last magazine I printed, I was 28 and I felt burnt out. I felt I failed. I was doing a full color, a 108 or so page hip hop magazine from Australia, which is a big island, a long way away. And we have like 23 million people, right? Small population. I just burnt out and I felt I'd failed. I felt I'd let down my people. And I was like, fuck, but I need to write. And so moving to New York helped me re-energize to a degree, even though you get burnt out working in advertising. Going to Strand Books every few months is a beautiful bookstore in New York. And that re-energized me. They've got a what do they call it? Literary nonfiction section. So books on writing and words. And I would pick up books every so often, a few books a year, and I'd read On Writing or On Writing Well, and The Artful Edit by Susan Bell, and I'd just chip away, and I was like, what do I really want to write about? I want to do creative writing, but I know I've got all this stuff that I want to get out about strategy, but I don't want to write a blog post that's a book. So I sat on that for a while and I experimented with different stories and screenplays.
Were you talking yourself out of it, or were you just trying to identify what's the format that is the best expression of how you were feeling at that point?
It was a combination of just feeling kind of burnt out, not like being a bit, caught up in moving to America and not really feeling I was doing good work. And people had told me that it's hard to do good work in New York based on the work I like to do. So I felt I was failing there as well. I had no work to show. And then I talked to other friends who've moved here, or a lot of other friends in senior roles. And they're like, I just go to meetings all the time. And, we're making money, but I don't have anything for my portfolio. And I'm like, but that to me is, I don't like to use the word failure, but there's a dramatic part of me was like, I feel like I'm failing. Like, what is this? And so there was that. And then there was trying to shift my identity from that hip hop world into what I was doing in America, trying to develop some writing techniques. I went quiet for a few years. I felt repressed. I did a talk at Cannes. We had no work to show. So I talked about how we worked, which is an important story for where I was. But I was like, am I just a fraud? This whole time. And so that all happened. And then as I moved into creating Sweathead and Mighty Jungle, I was like, I just need I didn't even put a time on it. I was like, I need to express. So I started doing weird stuff on the internet. I started doing events. I started doing training. I did events all over the world. And it's kind of embarrassing on one hand, because I was, late 30s then. I'm like, I need to find myself. Who am I? And I feel myself when I'm writing, and I feel myself when I'm teaching and when I'm on stage, even though I can be quiet in between all of that. And so as I started to play with these things, I started to gain a bit more confidence, even though I have a savage inner critic, like I think you do. And so I kind of got to the point where I had enough material. I'd just done all the dumps. Like I was writing in voices on Twitter, and people were like, are you okay, mate? Like I was just experimenting with things. And I felt like I'd shaken everything, like shaken a lot of my self-repression off. And then I read 2 books around the same time, which were Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning and Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way.
Oh, yeah.
Man's Search for Meaning, essentially, you're going to make it up. I was like, unfortunately, he had to spend time in concentration camps. He was a psychologist, but he was a prisoner in concentration camps, Viktor Frankl. That's the lesson I'm taking from it anyway. Maybe it's inaccurate. And then Julia Cameron, she's very Jungian. Like there are a lot of kind of Jungian and I guess Buddhist Zen ideas in her book, but a lot of it's about stream of consciousness writing and doing daily pages. And that really helped me. I was just writing for the sake of it, and I'd just let anything come out. And then over time, over a few weeks, I would start to be a bit more specific. Then I was in Dublin, and I went to the Dublin Writers Centre, and it's a really humble building. And I was reading these stories and I was doing the audio tour, and I listened to people like James Joyce, or stories about James Joyce and W.B. Yeats. And I was like, you know what? These are my people. earlier I'd been at the Seattle Pop Museum, and I almost cried going into the room with Jimi Hendrix and Nirvana. And I'm like, these are my people and they're artists. Like, I'm repressing myself. I used to write music. I used to write raps and poems, and I've been repressing myself and hiding maybe in this strategy career and advertising career for ages. I have to put myself out there, because the opposite of that is 25 years of depression. So that got me into writing the book, Adam.
I've tried that and it hasn't worked. Let me try the other thing.
Yeah. And I guess that's, facing your shadow, as they say, and individuation, and trying to become like yourself, become in yourself, become more of yourself. But that was my journey. And so 2 years ago, I was 40. I just turned 40 when I was in Dublin. I was a few months into being 40. And that number, like 30 with many people in this industry, it plays on your mind a lot, right?
It does. There's a weird finish line that you seem to pass. At 40, I had it too, where I was like, what happens? It feels like something's supposed to change, but nothing immediately did change. But I felt like I needed to start searching for something that was going to, answer questions that were popping up. You feel your mortality and your place in your career that you've just invested 20 years in feels at stake, at issue all of a sudden.
Yeah. And, apparently Carl Jung had this phase in his mid-30s where he felt like that. And then he and a lot of other people that I've spent time with, so there's selection bias, they commit to what I would call like a more savage form of self-expression, where they're like, I'm not getting younger, and my coping mechanisms from growing up in my household or whatever didn't work or don't work anymore. Maybe they work then or they don't work now. What do I want to do? And I think for so many people, art and identifying as needing to do art, which might lead you to identifying as being an artist, it is a useful identity to try to shift into.
And that's part of the artist's way is don't wait to become an artist. Here's the practices that you can take on right now. If you want to write. You don't have to have an epiphany that declares you a writer. That book is what I like about it, and it kind of aligns with my writing voices. It's very straightforward. There's not a lot of emotion in it. It's very practical. You want to write? Here's some things you can do to do that. And the first half of the book is very much like, this is what it's like to be someone who produces words on a page.
Yeah. Was there a concept or two with a name that you took out of that book?
The morning pages are the things that stuck with me from that book. And just the idea of, it doesn't matter what you're writing, just get the words, get your brain started sending words, and doing that freehand with a pen or, directly on paper versus typing. Mm-hmm. I did not keep up the practice for very long, but I learned from it that, what the point of it to me was, don't edit now. Start just when you sit down to write, let the words pour out. And if they're not pouring out, find a topic that you can write on, even in the middle of this paragraph that doesn't relate. You will edit it later, or you can hit a hard return and say, I'm going to highlight this text and come back to it and see if it ever made sense at all. All of a sudden you're writing 2,000 words about your dog in the middle of your book, but let your body know that it's okay to write, and you're distracted by something. Let's see what it is.
I agree. And I started to, a few weeks into doing morning pages, which it's like we said earlier, just use what you need. And I stopped because I was writing a book and I needed to get to that point. So I haven't finished the book, but initially I was just writing anything. And I felt like I was a 15-year-old, an emotional 15-year-old writing in my journal again. But over time I was like, there was a silly phrase or a sentence or a quote might have popped into my head just from a thought or from a memory. And I'm like, hang on, what if I put characters in that? And I write 3 or 4 pages on a Saturday morning at 10 a.m. about like, who invented marriage and why and who it serves. But I'm writing just silly characters. And I was like, okay, I can do this. And so that was really good. Shadow artists was a concept that she talks about that I found quite interesting. And a shadow artist is someone that is around artists, but is not an artist. So for example, a lot of people in strategy might repress their own creativity and artistry because they're around a creative department. Someone who runs an art gallery, someone who marries a painter, you're shadowing an artist, but you're not an artist. And I found that a really useful concept as well.
Yep. That is another one that comes to mind from the book that I definitely identify. You're sitting across across the creative floor or down the hall from the creative team, but you are not considered one of the creatives. It's kind of a hard. It's kind of harsh.
Well, it's harsh, and there are planners who don't identify as being creative, but there are also strategists and account planners who identify as being creative and who resent the fact that other people don't want them to see themselves as creative. And it's like, well, you're doing it to yourself, because the solution to that is to go be creative and put your name to it.
Right.
So like no one else is preventing you from doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just a weird way the way the agency world fetishizes and creates a comparative environment for that special class of people, but also tells you anybody can be creative. Ideas can come from anywhere in the agency, but not really, guys. It really comes from that floor over there. It comes from the 6th floor only, but anybody can participate. And strategists have to imagine a creative expression of their strategy, but don't tell anybody, because you're going to piss those guys off and they're working really hard. You know, it's like this weird, for new strategists, I think that's a tough place to learn is, all right, when is it okay for me to share an idea? And I think it varies by agency or business too. When is it okay? I have an idea that I think will help them. When's the right time to tell them?
Well, there's also, what is an idea? What are the different kinds of ideas? Who gets to have those kinds of ideas? Who leads and who follows with certain kinds of ideas? And that's why a sentence like an idea can come from anywhere. I don't mind it. It's just, what are you trying to say? Are you trying to say that because you think ideas can come from anywhere, that anybody can have them, therefore you don't need to pay someone who's good at them, which means it's okay to have 50 people in a room who don't even know what an idea is? Is that what you're saying? And is
an idea exclusively the answer to the brief in the mandatory format requested, or is an idea just that abstract thought? I read this brief and I had this idea. It could be a couple shopping for a house. Can you do anything with that? Well, no, that's the creative team's job. Don't tell us that idea. Come back when you have 300 by 250 banners.
Yeah. But the thing is, like, and so that's part of the reason why I wanted to write this book, is that these words are beautiful, but they need definition, because not only are a lot of the words that we use all the time not defined in a company or by the industry, there are different kinds of ideas. There are different kinds of insights. And then we use silent adjectives in front of these words to defend who we are and how we operate. And so the question that I put to everyone is like, what if all of this is just made public, maybe even up on your wall? How much heartache and pain and stress and time are you going to save?
Yes.
Why are you like using words to annoy each other? Because you don't know what they mean. That's why.
Yeah. And we don't agree on what they mean.
Yeah. And they don't have to mean something in an absolute way. You can define them how you want. The point is to define them and then not use them at each other, but use them for each other.
That's it. Oh, that's interesting. For each other. Did you get blocked at any point writing this book, or have you ever suffered block? I don't feel like it. I feel like I've always seen you sharing and having things that you're writing. But
I tap into emotion. So if I'm not writing, or if I'm quiet on the internet, I could be in a little bout of melancholy, or I'm just not feeling angry, or I've seized up. I see mental blocks with writing as fear-based, and also as a person not really wanting to get in touch with what's going on inside them. So mental blocks for me are like an act of avoidance. And knowing that I can just do a silly baby strategy drawing, or sit down and write something and be a smart ass in my head, I know I can get somewhere. So I don't fear mental blocks so much. As far as the act of writing. With the book, I was nervous because I was like, I like to hand draw or hand write. I didn't know how to start, and I didn't know if I wanted to write it on a computer. But the day or two after I got back from Ireland, I sat down. I knew what I wanted the title to be, and I knew I wanted the subtitle to be A Strategist's Fight for Meaning, because it's a shout out to Viktor Frankl. And I sat down and I was like, look, dude, you stop, blah, blah, blah. I opened up a document and I wrote the title at the slightly bigger font size in serif font. And I was like, okay. And then I wrote the subtitle. And then I was like, dude, don't be arrogant. Don't put your name there. I was like, no, that's what an author would do. So I put my name there. I was like, oh my God, I've got the first page. And then I knew what half the book was going to be, because it's basically my training material that I've played with intensely for several years now. then I wanted to write about the words that I hear strategists use. And because I interact with so many through Sweathead, like I'm interacting with hundreds really every week. And I'm like, okay, that word clarity keeps popping up. Truth, meaning, imposter syndrome is popping up again. What's all that about? Lone wolf. So I'd be like, okay, I'm going to grab all these words. I had a piece of paper. I wrote all the words down that I wanted to write about. I broke them into 2, life words and work words. And then they became my daily briefs. So I'd spend half a day writing about a particular word. And so I need that workflow to keep me going, but I don't feel intimidated by mental block. And if there's something going on with it, it's because I'm in a dark place that I don't want to be, that will probably end up being useful to me.
And when you come out of it, at the end of it, it'll turn into something you can write about.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what. That's funny. In the Hemingway days, he would put a piece of paper in the same typewriter and type. He didn't have to think about the format very hard. Yeah. I am a writer. This is the writing I do. But I'm working on something now too, where I was thinking, I should ask Mark about this because I'm not sure the format that this is going to take on when I'm done. And I was like, don't be an idiot. Just start writing it and let the format, that it will define itself. Eventually something in the work will say, this is how this should be. The final product of it should be expressed if it gets expressed, but just start writing it and see how the words are forming and then go from there.
Well, but the liberating and scary thought is the word art. So to me, this is my art. And I know that someone could pick up this book, especially someone who's more conservative, neurologically speaking, and more MBA-like and PhD-like. They could take it down and destroy it.
I would never.
But it's not there to be destroyed. It's art.
Yeah, I would never describe what I write as art. That's so funny. But
what if you did?
The new thing I'm working on is fiction, so I don't know yet. We haven't crossed that threshold yet. But the 2 books I've written so far are those art?
Well, that's for you to answer. I mean, you could drop in a third. You could have a trilogy that just creates maybe you write a prequel and it's completely absurdist. I don't know. I mean, I just find that this is a new idea to me. I've got friends who, are artists and they were artists from a young age. They don't think they know this. They know what I'm talking about. And they coach me on Instagram. If I post something weird on Instagram, they'll just be like, yeah, keep going. That's cool. Yeah. And I'm like, really? It looks stupid. They're like, no, just keep going. I'm like, damn it, why didn't I do this 30 years ago? You know all the tricks. But for some people, hearing you say that you think of yourself as an artist, they'll be like, you're so pretentious. And the strategy world's got a little bit of classism and snobbishness in it that I don't really like. I think we don't need it. It's not useful. It's people usually protecting their own privilege. But thinking of yourself as an artist, dangerous idea, because anything is possible and any reality is possible.
You know what I think is dangerous about it is I've never thought about this before. This is fresh. What's dangerous about it is when it is the result of research, it can't be, there's only so much you can push on it. But I remember I was a creative for, 15 years. Art is subjective. Yeah. So a brief is usually, it's good ones are based in facts and supported by research in some cases not. But it's facts and it's hard to assail that in a way that feels personal to the creator of it. Or the creative person, the person who the author can say, well, it's informed by this research, or the client asked me to include X. And so I'm buffered. I'm insulated from that critique. Where art, if you do a layout or if you paint something or if you write a book and it's art, it is wholly subjective and you are putting it out there. And it is, at that point you are admitting. So when I say I don't want to call myself art, I don't want to admit that I am susceptible to that critique.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
But then you have to define the word art. And I've got a funny story with that. So for me, art is trying to reveal profound truth, often in indirect ways. That's how I define it to myself. I've never studied art, but that's how I define it to myself. Now, I was in London a year or two ago and got off the plane, got a train from Heathrow or wherever I was into the city. It was not Heathrow, it was the other one. And nearly got run over by a motorbike because it was like 9 a.m. and I was super jet lagged. And then I made my way into like the National Gallery of Portraiture. Sorry, English people. I know you're all fancy and you know the words for things and I just stumbled my way through them. And I remember being in there and they were amazing. They're obviously amazing and important paintings. But I was like, based on my definition of art, I was like, this is not art. I don't want to spend time here. And I left. which is for some people stupid and ignorant and naive. But like, I wanted to have an experience with art, which was going to be about concepts and ideas. And I wanted to explore them and feel them. Looking at a bunch of paintings paid for by rich people, I was like, that's not art according to my definition. And so I left. I stormed out. I had a mini tantrum. I'd paid $20 or whatever it was to go in. But I really do like the idea of thinking of this stuff as art, because nothing's wrong. To me, a creative brief is part art. Yeah, you're using facts, but there's still a leap.
Yeah.
A little bit, I'd need to define that a lot more, but I think it's more, okay, what I will say is, for a strategist, I think it's useful to think of a creative brief or your artifacts as being more art-like than more business-like.
If you have not put that translation, that indirect expression, like as the result of all the research, then you probably have not written a good brief. If it is just
reporting.
You're reporting. You're not a journalist. You're a strategist. And it's a different thing. There's an aspect of gathering the information, but then you have to process the information into something that is expressing a point of view, which a journalist and a reporter is not supposed to do. In America, strictly that's what they do. But elsewhere, the idea is to gather the facts and keep those isolated. For a strategist, it is then to express those into something powerful that can inform and inspire people.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's difficult if you get too tripped up on the debates between subjectivity and objectivity, because I do see strategy as being a subjective craft.
Yes.
And it uses objectivity. It uses data and information and facts, but it assembles them in ways where there's a leap, a creation of new meaning, of newness.
Yeah.
And you can't prove that it's existed before because you're creating the thing. So there has to be some kind of leap, some kind of art there.
Oh, that's awesome. Mark, thank you for making time. This is awesome to hang out again. I haven't talked to you in a while.
I know. You're so far away in the desert over there.
Where can people find the book?
They can find it on my website, sweathead.co. I'm about to get sweathead.com. But it'll be, you can Google Sweathead, you can Google strategy as your words, and you can find it there.
And we will definitely link to it here in the show notes as well. Mark, thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
It's good to see you. It's good to hear you, and best wishes with that writing. Let me know how, like, if you start to think aggressively about yourself being an artist, I'm curious to see what happens.
I don't think.
What are you going to do?
Well, we'll see. We'll see what happens. That would be a challenging fork in the road for me, I think. I feel like I've already left that. I already retired from that, so it'd be weird to go back.
It's the path.
I'm wearing khakis right now, Mark. This is
Your dress sense has always had a little bit of a weird thing going on with it, but yeah.
My kids tell me that every day.
You could turn them into art.
All right. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks for having me, man.
Wait, don't stop listening. The show's not over. If you liked what you just heard, or you've liked any of the episodes of The Strategy Inside Everything, do me a favor. I really appreciate it. Leave a review wherever you listen to the show, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, wherever. Please leave us a rating and a review. Please, if you can, share this episode or another episode with a friend. Let them know what you liked about it. That helps us quite a bit. If you have ideas for guests, for topics, follow up on episodes you've heard, you can tweet at us at @apierno, that's me, or at strategy_inside, that's the show. Either way, I promise I will respond to you and get back to you right away. And listen, running this show is a labor of love. I really do it just because I enjoy the conversations, but it does cost money. So web hosting costs money. Microphones cost money. My kids' haircuts cost money. If you wouldn't mind, look at our Patreon. It's Patreon, Adam Pierno there, and you could help us out quite a bit. For more information about all the guests we've had, anything you want to know about the podcast, my 2 books, Underthink It and Specific, or ways to engage with me as a strategy consultant or as a speaker at your next event, please go to adampierno.com and you'll find all the information you want. And if you can't, just send me a note. Thanks a lot.